A man and his dog survived a deadly chase in New Orleans, only to be stranded deep in the bayou. They found a village, but it was eerily silent. The homes were still warm, but every adult was gone, vanished, lured into the swamp by a hypnotic voodoo drumbeat, leaving their children behind, alone and terrified. Now Jake and Wolf must enter a haunted plantation to face the man who stole an entire village. Jake Vance felt intensely out of place, and that was saying something. The velvet ropes and low, sultry thrum of a jazz bass were 1,000 miles from his Oregon cabin. He ignored the stares his outfit was drawing. Beside him, almost hidden under the small, round table, his partner felt the tension. Wolf was preternaturally calm, but his watchful eyes missed nothing, his ears swiveling to track the club's staff. On stage, Eliza Dubois finished her set, her voice sliding over the last note like warm honey. She was a captivating woman, sharp and elegant, and completely unaware of the deal about to go down. As the polite applause faded, a heavy-set man slid into the booth. This was Antoine, the smuggler boss, his expensive suit stretched tight. "Monsieur Vance," he smiled, his eyes cold. "The Spanish compass, if you please." Jake pushed the small antique brass device across the table. Antoine picked it up, examined it, and chuckled. "It is perfect." He snapped his fingers. Two of his largest men moved from the bar, blocking the only exit. "But I find I am in a sentimental mood. I will keep the compass, and you will leave, empty-handed." "That wasn't the deal," Jake said, his voice low. "The deal," Antoine said, "is what I say it is." Jake had anticipated this. "Wolf," it was the only command needed. Wolf exploded from under the table, a gray blur. A deep bark erupted from his chest as he launched himself at the guard nearest the door, knocking the man sideways over a table. The club erupted in screams. Jake moved fast, vaulting over the booth and grabbing the compass from Antoine's surprised hand. He pushed through the panicked crowd, Wolf clearing a path. He collided hard with Eliza, who was rushing off the stage. "What is going on?" she hissed, outraged. One of Antoine's men grabbed her arm. "He's with them!" "Sorry, lady," Jake said, grabbing her other hand and pulling her free. "You're with us now." They burst into a damp alley. "This way, vite!" a young voice yelled. A scrawny Cajun kid, maybe 12, waved from a rusted gate. This was Remy, their escape plan. They sprinted through the dark alleys, the heavy footsteps of Antoine's men echoing behind them. Remy led them to the docks. "That one!" he pointed to an airboat. They scrambled aboard. "They're coming!" Eliza shouted. Jake fired up the engine. The massive fan roared to life, a deafening sound. They shot out into the bayou. A sharp crack of gunfire echoed from the dark docks. Another. "They're shooting!" Eliza screamed. Jake felt the boat shudder violently as a bullet tore through the aluminum hull, low, near the waterline. The engine sputtered, caught, but the boat was already taking on water. They plunged into the darkness, the lights of New Orleans vanishing behind them. The airboat's massive engine sputtered, choked, and died. The sudden, terrifying silence of the bayou rushed in, broken only by the sound of water gurgling into the hull where the bullets had torn through. "Well, this is just wonderful," Eliza said, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she held her ruined silk dress away from the rising, oily water. "First, I'm dodging bullets, and now I'm stuck in—" She sniffed the air. "What is that smell?" "Mud, cypress, and worse," Remy said, his young face serious. "We gotta move. Boat's sinking, and those men, they'll hear us if we stay." Jake grabbed their small supply bag. "He's right. We go on foot." He slid over the side into the murky, waist-deep water. It was warm and thick. Wolf dropped in beside him, his calm posture replaced by a tense alertness. Eliza let out a small gasp as the water soaked her. They moved for hours. The swamp was a living, breathing entity, a maze of cypress knees and hanging moss. Insects droned in the humid air. Wolf stayed close to Jake, his nose working, his ears flat. Suddenly, the dog froze, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. Jake stopped, scanning the dark water. A few yards away, two yellow eyes broke the surface, regarded them, and submerged without a sound. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured, his hand on Wolf's neck. "We ain't safe here," Remy whispered, pushing them forward. "This way. I think I know a place." Just as Eliza looked ready to collapse, Remy pointed. "Vieux Marais, the old swamp." It was a small Cajun fishing village built on stilts over the water. But as they approached, an eerie silence settled over them. There were no lights, no voices. Fishing nets hung drying, brittle and unused. "Where is everyone?" Eliza asked, her voice barely a whisper. Wolf was the first to sense it, whining low in his throat. The village was empty. They moved from shack to shack, finding only cold hearths and half-eaten meals left on tables. Finally, in the central meeting house, they found life. An old woman, her skin like wrinkled parchment, sat in a rocking chair. She was surrounded by children, at least a dozen, ranging in age from toddlers to Remy's age, all watching the newcomers with silent, terrified eyes. "Tante," Remy breathed, recognizing the old woman. "What happened?" The woman, Tante, looked up, her eyes hollow. "They're gone, Remy, all of them." "Gone where?" Jake asked, kneeling. Wolf moved forward cautiously, sniffing the air, then sat at Jake's side, sensing the profound grief. "The call," Tante whispered. "One night, a sound, like drums from deep in the swamp. The adults, your parents, Remy, all of them, they just walked away, like they were dreaming, walked right into the water." She pointed to an empty pedestal in the center of the room. "And they took it. The Pierre d'eau, our waterstone, our protection. Now the water is sick, the fish are gone, and only the children remain." Jake looked at the small, hungry faces, then at Remy, who was staring at the empty doorway his parents had walked through. He looked at Tante, the last guardian. "Who took them?" Jake asked. "The Baron," she said, fear in her voice. "From Bel Ombre. He took our souls." Bel Ombre. Plantation rose from the fog of the bayou like a decaying skeleton. It was a once grand, pre-war mansion, its massive white columns stained green with mildew, the wide windows dark and empty. "Bel Ombre," Remy whispered, his voice tight with local superstition. "Tante calls it the beautiful shadow. She says nobody goes near." "We do," Jake said. They moved through the overgrown gardens, the air thick and still. Eliza held her breath, visibly terrified. Wolf moved like a true shadow, staying low, his nose testing every scent. He kept pausing, a low rumble in his chest, directed at the house itself. Jake found a loose window near the back, by the old kitchens. He forced it open with a low grating sound and slipped inside, followed immediately by Wolf. Remy scrambled in after him. "I hate this," Eliza whispered, climbing in last. "I truly deeply hate this." The house was dark but not abandoned. It smelled of rot, river mud, and something else. Something sweet, like burnt sugar. They moved through a grand hallway, their boots silent on the rotting carpets. Wolf, however, suddenly stopped. His head snapped toward the grand staircase. He didn't growl, but his entire body went rigid. "What is it, boy?" Jake murmured. A slow, mocking clap echoed from the darkness above. Clap, clap, clap. They froze. A figure descended the stairs, not a guard, but a man in an immaculate white linen suit. He was tall, with an aristocratic face and a chilling, hypnotic grace. This was Baron Lacroix. "Visitors?" Lacroix said, his voice smooth as silk. "From the empty village, I presume. We were wondering when the children would send help." As he spoke, heavy footsteps sounded behind them. The kitchen door burst open. 2 large men, the Baron's guards, blocked their only exit, clubs in hand. They were trapped. "Bind them," Lacroix ordered, his voice never rising. "But do not harm the dog. Such loyalty is a rare commodity." They were marched up the grand staircase, their hands tied. Lacroix led them not to a cell, but to a grand balcony overlooking the vast cleared land behind the plantation. "You came seeking answers," Lacroix said, spreading his arms wide. "Behold, the answer." Jake, Eliza, and Remy stared in horror. Wolf, held on a thick leash by a guard, let out a low, confused whine. In the harsh glare of industrial floodlights, a massive construction project was underway. A huge, ugly dam was being built across the river, choking the life from the bayou. And building it were hundreds of people. They moved in perfect, silent unison, lifting rocks, mixing mortar, pulling carts. Their movements were jerky, automatic. Jake scanned the faces. He saw the fisherman from Vieux-Marais. He even saw Antoine, the smuggler from the jazz club, hauling a heavy timber, all of them working like automatons, their eyes blank and empty. "What did you do to them?" Eliza whispered, horrified. Lacroix smiled. He held up a small, dark stone that seemed to drink the light. It pulsed with a faint, sickly energy. "The Pierre d'Eau, the water stone, the first of three. It does not command them, my dear. It unifies them. It blesses them with a singular purpose." He looked down at the silent working masses. "A new world requires a unified will, and I," he said, "am that will." The heavy oak door of the balcony slammed shut, and the guards shoved them forward. "Move," one grunted. They were forced down a narrow, winding staircase deep into the foundations of the old plantation house. The air grew cold and damp. The guards stopped at a heavy, riveted steel door, pulled back a thick iron bolt, and threw it open. "In," the guard ordered. Jake went first, scanning the darkness. Eliza and Remy followed, and Wolf pushed in last, staying close to Jake's heels. The door slammed shut behind them with a sound of finality. A heavy thud followed as the bolt was shot. They were in absolute darkness. Remy fumbled in his pocket and produced a small, cheap lighter. He sparked it, the tiny flame casting huge, flickering shadows. They were in a round, brick-lined chamber. It looked like an old cistern or wine cellar. "I knew I hated old houses," Eliza whispered, her voice trembling. A low, gurgling sound echoed in the chamber. "What is that?" Remy asked, moving the lighter. Jake saw it first. Water? It was pouring steadily from 3 large pipes near the floor, dark, muddy water from the bayou. "He's drowning us," Jake said, his voice grim. He immediately moved to the walls, running his hands over the slick bricks, testing them. "We have to climb," Eliza said, her voice rising in panic as the water swirled around their ankles. "Won't work," Jake said. "The bricks are too slick. The curve is too steep." The water was rising faster now, quickly reaching their knees. Remy tried to scramble up, but slid back down into the churning water. Wolf, however, was not paying attention to the water. His magnificent, calm posture was gone, replaced by a focused intensity. He was sniffing frantically at one section of the wall, whining low in his throat. "What is it, boy?" Jake waded over to him. Wolf barked, a single sharp sound, and began scratching at the bricks, digging at the mortar. Jake put his shoulder against the spot. He pushed. It's hollow." He ran his hands over it. "It's not brick. It's plaster, made to look like the rest." "An air vent, maybe?" Remy splashed over. "Stand back!" Jake braced himself and delivered a powerful kick. The plaster cracked, but held. Wolf, understanding the urgency, reared up and slammed his body weight against the same spot. A larger crack appeared, and a puff of dry dust came out. "Together!" Jake yelled. He and Wolf slammed into the weakened wall at the same time. With a splintering crash, the section gave way, revealing a dark, narrow tunnel. Jake pushed Remy through first. "Go! Go!" Eliza scrambled after him. Jake grabbed Wolf's collar and helped the dog through before pulling himself into the darkness, just as the water in the trap room surged behind them. The tunnel was dry, but tight. It sloped downward, leading them toward the sounds of industry. They emerged onto a rickety metal catwalk overlooking the massive dam project. They were now in the heart of it, unseen. Below them, the hundreds of enthralled villagers worked under the harsh floodlights, their faces blank. The steady, rhythmic sound of picks hitting rock echoed unnaturally. "They're not just building," Jake whispered, observing the scene. "They're digging, looking for the other stones." "Jake, behind us!" Remy yelled. They spun around. A spotlight flooded the catwalk, blinding them. Baron Lacroix stood at the far end, flanked by a dozen guards. He had not trapped them to kill them, he had channeled them, flushing them out like rats. "Such resourcefulness," Lacroix's voice boomed over the noise. "It is almost a pity." Guards moved in from both sides. They were trapped. Jake looked at Remy, then at a narrow, dark drainage pipe near their feet. "Remy, the pipe! Go, take Wolf!" Remy, small and fast, understood instantly. He dove for the pipe. "Wolf, allez!" Wolf, loyal to the command, followed the boy, scrambling into the small, dark opening. "No!" a guard yelled, but they were already gone. The remaining guards converged on Jake and Eliza. Jake fought back, a blur of motion, but he was outnumbered. A guard brought the butt of his rifle down hard on Jake's head. The world exploded in white light and then went black. When Jake woke, the world was a throbbing, humid pulse. The agonizing throb in his head was nothing compared to the sound that filled the air, a relentless, deep, hypnotic drumming. He was tied to a stone chair in a vast, dark cavern beneath the plantation, lit only by torches. Before him, Baron Lacroix stood at a crude altar where the 3 voodoo stones pulsed with a sickly, dark light. Eliza was tied to a post nearby, conscious and terrified. "You fight so hard, Monsieur Vance," Lacroix said, his voice barely rising above the drums. "You fight for loyalty, for honor, such wasted energy. It is much easier to obey." Lacroix raised the glowing water stone. He began to chant, the words ancient and guttural. The drumming intensified, the rhythm matching Jake's own panicked heartbeat. He wasn't speaking to Jake. He was speaking at him, forcing the magic into his mind. Jake fought it, clenching his teeth, trying to focus on his training, on Wolf, on anything. But the power of the stone was immense. It was a heavy, crushing weight on his will. His vision blurred, the edges of the room turning gray. The faces of the guards, Eliza, even Lacroix, became distant and unimportant. The only thing that mattered was the endless pulsing rhythm of the drums and the Baron's voice. His struggles ceased. His muscles went slack. The fire in his eyes went out. "He is ours," Lacroix smiled satisfied. "Cut him loose. Give him a pickaxe. He will join the others at the dam." Meanwhile, in the darkness of a ventilation shaft above, Remy and Wolf watched in horror. Wolf had tracked Jake by scent, his calm posture replaced by a desperate, low whine. He knew his master was in trouble. They saw Jake, his movements stiff and robotic, being led from the chamber. "Dat ain't him," Remy whispered, his voice trembling. Dat ain't Jake." Wolf couldn't wait. He burst from the shaft, a blur of gray fur, landing on the cavern floor with a sharp click of claws. He barked furiously, running straight for Jake. "The dog!" a guard shouted, raising his weapon. "No," Lacroix commanded, intrigued. "Let us test the bond. Guard, command our new servant. Tell him to destroy his pet." The guard smirked, enjoying this. "You heard the Baron," he barked at Jake. "Kill the dog." Jake turned, his face a blank mask. He raised the heavy pickaxe he'd been given. Wolf stopped barking, confused. He whined, sensing the wrongness, the void where Jake should be. "Jake!" Remy pleaded from the shadows. Jake advanced, raising the pickaxe higher for a killing blow. Wolf did not retreat. He did not bare his teeth. He simply stood his ground, let out a soft, pained whimper, and pushed his head firmly against Jake's unmoving hand. He nudged his master's arm, an act of pure, familiar trust. Jake paused. The pickaxe wavered. That connection, that simple, unconditional act of love, was a spark in the overwhelming darkness of the curse. It was a frequency the magic could not suppress. Jake's hand trembled. He looked down at the dog. Wolf. The name was a shockwave. The gray void shattered. He remembered the cabin, the river, the cargo ship, the trust. With a roar of pure rage, Jake spun, not at the dog, but at the guard. He slammed the butt of the pickaxe into the man's chest, sending him flying. The curse was broken. "Impossible!" Lacroix hissed. "Get Eliza!" Jake yelled at Remy, his eyes blazing with fury. "We're leaving!" Jake roared, his mind his own again. While Remy scrambled to free Eliza, Jake and Wolf became a whirlwind of protective fury. Wolf moved low, a gray shadow, his deep barks and strategic snaps keeping the guards disorganized. "The stones!" Eliza yelled, now free. Jake saw Lacroix trying to restore the ritual, his hands on the 3 glowing stones at the altar. Ignoring the guards, Jake lifted the heavy pickaxe and slammed it down, not on the stones, but on the ancient stone altar itself. A massive crack split the rock. The connection broke. The 3 stones flared with a painful light, and the hypnotic drumming stopped instantly. Throughout the dam project, hundreds of men and women suddenly stopped working, looking at their hands and their surroundings in dazed confusion. The curse was broken. "Get to the tracks," Remy shouted, knowing the area. "It's the only way out." They bolted from the cavern, bursting onto a loading platform. Below them, an old narrow-gauge sugarcane railway line disappeared into the darkness of the swamp. A line of small, empty ore carts sat waiting. They piled into the first one. Jake shoved the rusty brake lever forward, and with a metallic groan, the cart began to roll, picking up speed. "They are escaping," Lacroix's voice echoed. Moments later, the sound of another cart clattering on the tracks signaled the chase had begun. The sugarcane cart rocketed through the night, its metal wheels screaming on the pitted rails. They plunged through narrow tunnels of cypress trees and over rickety wooden trestles. Eliza held on, terrified, while Remy and Jake scanned the track ahead. Wolf stood perfectly balanced, his ears flat against the wind, his eyes fixed on the pursuing cart, which was closing the gap. The track suddenly ended, opening up over a deep, wide river chasm. The only way across was a long, swaying rope bridge, barely wide enough for a person. "Everyone out!" Jake yelled. They scrambled from the cart just as Lacroix's cart slammed to a halt behind them. They ran onto the bridge. The wooden slats swayed violently under their feet. Halfway across, Lacroix and his 2 largest guards stepped onto the bridge, blocking their escape. Lacroix was wearing the 3 voodoo stones on a leather harness, and they pulsed with dark energy. "The stone belongs to Belle Ombre," Lacroix shouted, drawing a large machete. "Eliza, Remy, keep going," Jake ordered. He turned to face the Baron. Jake and Lacroix fought on the narrow, unstable bridge, a desperate battle of knife against machete. Lacroix, fueled by the stone's magic, was strong, but Jake was faster. Lacroix raised his machete for a final blow. Seeing no other way, Jake ducked under the swing and slashed, not at the man, but at the thick, frayed support rope holding the bridge to the cliff. The sound of the snapping cable was like a gunshot. The bridge dropped, lurching sideways. The 2 guards screamed as they lost their footing and fell into the dark void. Lacroix, caught by surprise, stumbled. In that split second, Jake lunged forward. He grabbed the harness on Lacroix's chest and ripped it free, securing the waterstone, Pierre d'Eau, in his fist. Lacroix howled, not in pain, but in loss, as the rest of the bridge gave way. He clawed for the stone, but it was too late. He fell backward, disappearing into the blackness of the chasm below. Jake, clutching the rescued stone, hung perilously from the last few feet of the bridge still attached to the cliff. Wolf barked frantically from the ledge until Jake finally pulled himself and the stone to safety. As dawn broke, they returned to Vieux-Marais. The villagers, now free, were walking home, dazed but alive. Remy found his parents in a tearful reunion. Jake, exhausted, walked to Tante and placed the waterstone back on its pedestal. The children gathered around their parents, and for the first time in weeks, the sounds of life returned to the empty village. In the end, it wasn't the dark magic of the stones that held the most power. It was the bond that was strong enough to break them. A single, trusting touch from Wolf was more powerful than any curse. That is the heart of every story we tell here at Paws Narratives, that the greatest adventures are the ones we share with those who are loyal to us. If you believe in that too, we hope you'll subscribe and become part of this community. We truly love reading your own stories of loyalty in the comments. The journey is far from over, and our next narrative is waiting for you now, right on the screen.